we finally made it. Pitch Black is dropping today officially on TCG Live, and it will be coming out in stores tomorrow, which means we're getting a bunch of new cards, and some decks are changing a lot, other decks are not changing that much. I think Alakazam is kind of in an interesting spot right now where there's a couple different ways to play it and to kind of think about the deck. It's a deck that has had its ups and downs, you know, it's won regional championship before, it has done pretty bad before, so like it's a deck that kind of fluctuates depending on what's kind of relevant in the meta, I would say. Just kind of the nature of the deck, you know, the fact that its attack is an effect essentially, so there are certain cards that just kind of auto beat this deck essentially. So I think there's a lot of things to think about with Alakazam moving forward, especially going into Pitch Black. So today I want to kind of talk about what we've seen early on in this format. And what we've seen so far in Pitch Black format is two major tournaments. There was the Indonesia Master Ball League, which had about 1,300 players, and of course there was the Japan Championships back in June with about 2,700 players. And essentially with both of these tournaments, Alakazam didn't necessarily do too great as a whole. With the Indonesia Master Ball League, you look at the results and they had about the top 155, 160 decks that placed at the event, and we only saw Alakazam on there twice, which is a little bit, I guess, discouraging because, you know, 160 players, you would imagine there's a couple more Alakazams in there, but we really only saw two. We had the 7th place finisher here with Alakazam, including the new Toucannon card, and then the 114th place, which was kind of more of a traditional Alakazam to Dunsparce list. And over with the Japan Championships, we have like the top 32 lists or so. A couple of them are missing on there, so we don't have all of the decks on there, but from what we do have, there was actually no Alakazam that placed. I think this is still a very solid deck. I think it's a great deck to play right now in the format. You just have to accept the fact that there are certain decks out there that beat this deck, and you have to kind of be okay with that. You have to kind of like pick your battles, I would say. You know, you can hard tech for some of these matchups that you typically would auto lose with Alakazam, but that means you're going to cut more consistency cards or more cards that are used to counter things like Dragapults, which we will kind of see here with some of these lists. And it seems like they just keep adding cards that just kind of hurt Alakazam. For example, we have the new Hide and Sneak deck, which essentially kind of auto beats Alakazam if they play it correctly, and that's because the Hide and Sneak ability will prevent effects of attacks like Alakazam from actually doing damage to them. So essentially, if you go for Powerful Hand on a Sinistcha or on a Banette, you're doing absolutely nothing. And it's like, sure, you can add an attacker or two to kind of deal with those things, but in the end, they're gonna have a lot of tools to beat you anyways. What we see here is the 7th place list from the Indonesia Master Ball League Championships here, and you'll notice that we do have a new evolution line in here with Toucannon, which I will talk about in just a moment here, but I do think it is a pretty solid addition to the deck. You'll also notice that we're going back to Battle Cage here, getting rid of a lot of those cards that became popularized with Karis's winning list from the regionals. So it is kind of going back a little bit towards that more traditional Alakazam Dudunsparce build with the new inclusion of Toucannon as well. So we are running a 2-1-2 line here, adding another Rare Candy. So we're running 4 copies of Rare Candy just to be able to consistently evolve. And honestly, the goal here is to draw cards. Obviously, you're playing Alakazam, but we also do have another solid attacker now. And Toucannon feels pretty good in the deck so far, so it basically gives you extra draw every single turn with its ability Aerial Draws. So if you have 1 Toucannon or 2 Toucannons, you're just drawing extra cards every single turn. This is great against things like Unfair Stamp or Red Card. It just gives you the ability to draw that extra card, which could help you get out of that spot. And it also kind of just fixes math sometimes. You know, a lot of times when I play Alakazam, I find myself like 1 or 2 cards short, and a Toucannon can really help with that. It also gives you an attacker into some of these auto loss matchups. So we have things like Team Rocket's Articuno, we have things like the Hide and Sneak deck, things like that Rocky Fighting Energy as well. So all these cards just block the damage from Alakazam. We now have a solid attacker that actually hits pretty hard, and is able to kind of deal with those things a little bit better. And I mentioned earlier that, like, you know, some of these decks like Hide and Sneak, they're just going to kind of run you over regardless because they have so many different attackers that they can use. But I think Toucannon really helps with some of these other situations. So we see things like Crustle, for example, which will play sometimes the Team Rocket's Articuno, and even sometimes like the Team Rocket's Kangaskhan, just to have like one attacker essentially that's a Team Rocket's Pokemon. And essentially what Toucannon does is it kind of shuts down like these little 1 or 2 card inclusions to tech for Alakazam. You're still gonna have a really rough time into decks that just completely beat you like Hide and Sneak, but you now have an attacker that can deal with these little 1-off, 2-off cards that are like specifically put into decks to deal with Alakazam, like Team Rocket's Articuno. So against things like Team Rocket's Mewtwo, for example, or even Honchkrow, things like that play the Team Rocket's Articuno, you have a Toucannon now that can deal with those 1 or 2 copies of Articuno and allow you to actually play the game. So I think Toucannon really helps fix a lot of those things. We have a bunch of rare candies, so we can, you know, evolve into it even if it gets knocked out. So we have a way to kind of deal with those matchups now with Toucannon. And it's also a really solid attacker in general, especially when you have low hand sizes. So let's say you get unfair stamped or something like that, you now have an attacker that can still do pretty big damage. Like if your side of the bench is full of Pokemon, you're hitting for 160 plus 20 more for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so you can probably still hit reliably for about 200, 220, somewhere around there, which is usually enough. So I really do think Toucannon is a solid inclusion in the deck. The downside, of course, is that we have to lose cards like this here just to kind of fit in the space. So obviously with Karis's build that was popularized, we had things like Handheld Fan, Elgium, Dedenne, another Enhanced Hammer, the Nighttime Mines, everything like that. And we really don't have the deck space for that anymore. So with Toucannon, I think a 2-1-2 line makes sense. You want to be able to actually evolve into it, so you're not going to run like a 1-1-1 line or anything like that, which means that we are including 5 cards for this. And adding that extra rare candy makes sense because we're only playing 1 copy of the middle evolution. So really we're kind of adding 6 cards to fit this in, which means we need to cut 6 cards. We have to cut down some things like a stadium. We have to cut some of these, you know, tech Pokemon, these tech cards that actually help with things like Dragapult. And, you know, in return, as you'll see here, we don't have as many ways to deal with something like a Dragapult. So this goes back to what I said earlier, where you have to kind of pick your battles here. It's like, do you want a hard tech for Dragapult, but you do worse into some of these other things? Or do you want to have this Toucannon card, which can kind of help across the board, but it's going to make your Dragapult matchup a little bit worse because we have to cut some of these cards. It really is kind of a decision on what you want to do, and that's why I think there's like 2 ways to kind of play the deck right now. I think there's this kind of new way with Toucannon that just helps against the field in general, and then there's still the older way, which was Karis's build, which is kind of more teched out specifically for Dragapult, which is obviously still the best deck in the format right now. I made a couple changes to that 7 plays list. This is kind of what I have right here. I do think the Genesect is worth including. That's basically all I added here was the Genesect and 2 handheld fans. I think it's definitely worth it to keep those cards, even if we have to cut some stuff. So for the other list here, I cut 1 Kadabra, I ended up cutting 1 energy card, and I ended up cutting 1 Hilda, so we're running the 3-3 line of supporters there. My thought process there is you're going to be drawing cards with Alakazam as long as you can kind of get that base setup going with Telepathic Energy, so eventually you're going to kind of draw into what you need anyways. And I think Genesect with Handheld Fan, not only does it help against Dragapult because you can stop Unfair Stamp, you also have the Handheld Fan to move energies around from Dragapult, but I think it also deals with stuff like Festival Lead now because Festival Lead is becoming a lot more popular. It's getting better as well. It can one-shot you with Gladion. Having Handheld Fan really kind of helps shut down that deck a little bit, so I think that is a really good inclusion, not only for Dragapult but also for Festival Lead, which are 2 of the best decks right now in the format. So if I was playing the deck, I would definitely not cut the Genesect or the Handheld Fans. I would find some kind of way to fit it in, and so this is kind of my thought process of where the deck should be right now. This is what I would play if I was playing Alakazam right now in the Pitch Black format. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this deck. If you're high on Alakazam or if you're low on it, I think it does have potential. I do think it is overall going to be a little bit worse with just some of the decks that are good right now. I think Festival League just really gets a lot better with Pitch Black, and I think it just has tools now to kind of deal with these other single prize matchups. But I think Alakazam gets some cool new inclusions with the Toucannon that really helps analyze other matchups. So I think in general, it's going to make Alakazam better, but I just think right now in the meta, it's not the best pick, if that makes sense. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the new Pitch Black set here. I'll probably be streaming this weekend sometime. We'll see. And I'm going to be attending a 1K tournament on Saturday, so we'll see how that goes. I'll keep you guys updated, but hope you guys have a good one, and I will catch you guys in the next one.